Hi everyone, and welcome to this on-demand webinar brought to you by CA. My name is Jim Malone. I'm the Senior Content Strategist with IDG. Now we're here to discuss the latest technologies that are transforming networking and IT infrastructure. And with me to walk us through some of the most important aspects of that transformation are a pair of experts. First, let's welcome Rohit Mehra, Vice President Network Infrastructure for IDC. Rohit, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Tell us a little bit about your role at IDC and what you've been working on.
Thank you, Jim, and happy to be here. Yes, I do cover at IDC a whole bunch of network infrastructure technologies, all the way from the enterprise into the cloud and service providers. And what's been keeping me up at night and keeping me busy, of course, as we say it, is on all the transformation that's going on with the enterprise wide area network. There's so much happening with regards to clouds, for example, and how applications need to be consumed within the enterprise. So SD-WAN as a whole, and then the entire thing around visibility, artificial intelligence, which is another key area that the industry is innovating on.
Well, we're really happy you could be here with us today, Rohit. This is an aspect of transformation that doesn't get a whole lot of attention, but it's really crucial for successful digital transformation. So thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
Also, I want to welcome Steve Guthrie. Steve's an advisor for AIOps with CA. Steve, welcome. We're really happy you could be here for this session. Tell us a little bit about your role at CA and what's keeping you busy.
So I spend most of my time working with our prospects and customers and the trusted advisors that I work with. And the group that I'm in, AIOps, is focused on the user experience from a application performance, infrastructure, and network operations monitoring perspective. I've traveled heavily, and in doing so, I learned some great stories from our customers, and from that can derive some best practices. And so indeed, my comments today will be largely based on that experience.
That's excellent. We look forward to that. It's such an important part of transformation, as we mentioned, especially the monitoring part. So we'll look forward to some details about that. Now, before we get started, a few housekeeping items. We're coming to you on demand today. So while we can't take your questions in real time, you can use the Q&A widget for your player to send a question to our speakers, and we'll get you an answer in a couple of business days. We also recommend downloading a copy of today's presentation to share with your colleagues. And with that, let's get started. I'm going to turn it over to Rohit Mehra to get us started.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, everybody, for joining this webinar around network visibility for a key transformation that is happening within the enterprise. And that the term, of course, which most of you are familiar with, given that you're attending this session, is around SD-WAN, software-defined WANs. And again, I look at SD-WAN as an iteration of software-defined networking, SDN, which many of you must be familiar with. So let me quickly walk you through what I will talk about briefly over the next 15-odd minutes or so before I hand it over to my friend Steve Guthrie to cover his experiences given all his travels and interactions with customers all over the world. So I'm going to talk a little bit about digital transformation, as you can see my agenda, and really the impact on cloud vis-a-vis some of this evolution that we are seeing regarding the wide area network. We'll certainly look at evaluating the market and, more importantly, the adoption trends that we are starting to see, given this market is a little over 2 or 3 years old now. And we'll explore network visibility as a domain and the needs, how these needs are important to augmenting SD-WANs and to really optimize the user experience, if you will. And finally, from my perspective, I will leave you with some essential guidance as you go ahead with your strategic planning around this important domain, and hand it over to Steve so he can cover his part for today's session. So without further ado, let me jump right into it. I want to start by introducing the concept of IDC's third platform that many of you are familiar with, of course, and those are the generations that we have seen of IT over the last several decades. But then within the third platform, which is the current generation that we are in, we look at basically chapter 1, which was more around experimentation. We started about 10 years ago vis-a-vis cloud, mobility, analytics, bringing all of these together to really help optimize IT and IT applications. More recently, we've been looking at this phase of multiplied innovation. which is trying to take some of those early stage experiences of ours in the IT industry and multiply these across different domains. And finally, think once we've got the scale we want to, getting over to autonomy. And for those of you who've used, the term self-driving in many of their, life experiences, whether it's a self-driving car, well, we don't have self-driving planes yet, but anything that you can think of from a self-driving perspective, from our standpoint, that is autonomy. And of course, there's a lot that has to happen between now and an autonomous world that we live in, and certainly ML and AI are going to play an important part, their due part in that. And we'll be talking more about those aspects, certainly, vis-a-vis SD-WAN and network visibility today. So in the interest of moving along, I wanted to just talk about the growth of the cloud-optimized enterprise. This shouldn't be any surprise for those of you, who are IT practitioners, that cloud is, a big part of what, we as IT implement today, whether it's hosting applications in the public cloud, hosting applications on hosted data centers or hosted clouds, or you may have your own private cloud, in your own data centers too. The key aspect here is really the number of enterprises with cloud-optimized businesses continues to ramp significantly. What we are seeing, almost a threefold increase from what is today. By the way, today's number is more closer to about 15%, and we see that jumping in 24 months to about a little over 40%. And specifically in our survey, we found that to be at 42%, well, enterprise running cloud-optimized applications and businesses. So implementing a proactively managed cloud strategy really supports this business innovation while improving IT operational efficiencies. And hence, we do feel that any of this optimization needs to happen in conjunction with the rest of IT infrastructure. And of course, network needs to play a role there, of course. No question about that. So moving right along, as I mentioned earlier, and this is, again, nothing new, but I wanted to reiterate a couple of points as we move forward here. The cloud is here to stay. We are seeing a lot of innovation vis-a-vis, cloud deployments. And many of these, by the way, I'm saying 72% of these deployments, our surveys are saying these are likely to be multi-cloud. So you're not going to be relying on one cloud provider or just one type of cloud provider as you move forward. You'll be using a plethora of these as you move forward. So keep that in mind as you build the rest of your planning and strategies for developing your applications and your infrastructure. So on the top right, you can see there's another quick survey data point here. On the question that we asked our respondents was, on a scale of 1 to 5, how important is SaaS in your WAN technology choices? So again, keep this in mind. The slide is more generic about cloud and cloud growth across different domains. But then when it comes to WAN technology choices, SaaS applications and the use of SaaS providers, how important is that? And you can see here where they were rated at 3.81 today. In 12 months, that was jumping to 4.12. So if you just look at the numerics behind it, 3.8 to 4.12 is not a huge jump, but then think how this trend line will evolve over the next 5 to 10 years. That's pretty significant growth from our standpoint, and believe me, we look at numbers all the time and trend lines all the time. We do think this is a significant market transition. So I'll move to the next slide here and really start to get a little bit deeper into, enterprise wide area networks and try and give you my perspective as to why we think this is a complex area. You're looking for agility, you are looking for flexibility and efficiency, and you want to take it out all the way to the enterprise edge, right? I think most of you will agree with that. But then our traditional WAN was never built for cloud. We essentially thought of point-to-point links or routed networks where you, at best, you connected your branch back to the data center and then, connect it, forget it, and then for the next several years, that's the way it stayed, and you had a built-in capacity or rather overcapacity, and so you never had to think about it. Guess what? That world has changed. And I think the picture that I've tried to include on this slide here tells you what the new world looks like. And I think most of you listening in will agree that this is sort of resembling what your environment looks like. You have multiple branches, you have data centers, you have SaaS providers that you work with, and I've given you some examples. Office 365. I mean, you can't have a more blatant example of a SaaS provider than Office 365, right? You might be thinking about infrastructure as a service, and look at some of the big names there with public cloud providers, right? Microsoft Windows Azure, AWS, etc. I don't need to go down the list. But effectively, the point is, we have had a cloud unfriendly architecture. Look at the left of your slide. The complexity that goes with it. And again, we're moving towards trying to make IT's world simple. But we've had a complex world. You need to be thinking in terms of simplicity. You've had bandwidth issues vis-a-vis cost. You need to be thinking, okay, how do I cost optimize my current infrastructure? And lastly, security, which is top of mind in any and all customer interactions that we have. We've had a fragmented security model, and with the traditional WAN architecture, that model breaks down, more so in the era of the cloud, and when it comes to public cloud providers. So all in all, without harping on this too much, the bottom line is you may continue to use your MPLS or broadband connections, but you are thinking in terms of how do I solve this conundrum that I'm in with performance and latency and security being top of mind. So with that, I'll move to the next slide where I do have a very interesting survey data point for you. And this is one of our surveys. In fact, this is our SD-WAN survey from 2017, where we asked users, what are your top 3 challenges when it comes to wide area network deployments? And as you can see from this chart, the top 3 here that came out loud and clear were security, complexity, and the third point is analytics and visibility. It drives home the point and explains why IT practitioners continue to look at ways on how they can optimize and get the most out of their infrastructure while solving these top 3 challenges. And whether you look at examples, I mean, Caterpillar is a great example on the top right. Whirlpool, another U.S. company that really has been driving innovation in appliances over the last several years. All of these are looking at digital transformation followed by network transformation, and then how do they optimize their wide area network and get the most out of that from an IT perspective. And that's what really is driving the industry towards software-defined WANs. So that actually is a good segue for me to move to the next slide, where I'm going to talk a little bit about SD-WANs and articulate the essence of why this transformation is important for the industry and for practitioners such as yourselves, but more importantly, what benefits can you expect from this transition towards SD-WAN? So one, as I said to you earlier, there's a lot of complexity. If you deploy SD-WAN, really what you're doing is you're simplifying your WAN architecture, right? Number 2, you're improving application availability and, more importantly, the user experience. And I think Steve will tell you this very, very clearly, and he talks to a lot of end users as well. The end user experience is absolutely top of mind when it comes to IT. So availability and that application and how you serve and deliver that application to any and every end user, irrespective of where they are, is absolutely key. You also want to reduce your dependence over time on MPLS. That has been the tried and tested connectivity methodology for years. And we don't think MPLS is going away. It's secure, it's high performance. But then when you start looking at the cost attributes of MPLS, things start to change. Because with broadband, you are able to get these days a lot of capacity, which you need, by the way, for your cloud applications. But you want to use broadband and other technologies as an adjunct, as an add-on to what you may have already for MPLS, right? The next one is around SaaS and performance and infrastructure as a service performance. The more and more we use cloud, we want to continue to improve their performance. You might be jumping through multiple hops to get to your SaaS provider, right? You will have latency, you will increase latency, but the purpose of SD-WAN is to continuously monitor and look at the traffic that is going across multiple hops, multiple cloud providers, inter-exchange providers and the like, but you still want to optimize. And then the last part is, it's all about the edge. We are having a lot of discussions in the industry these days around IT moving out to the edge. There's no doubt that cloud is going to be around for a long, long time, but IT needs to now focus for the next several years on the edge to make sure they optimize the coexistence of the WAN edge with cloud. So those are some of the benefits that you can expect to see when it comes to SD-WAN. And then as we move forward, the point around the edge that I made on the last slide itself involves network transformation, of course, and the cloud app experience. But I also want to share with you two key industry trends that we think are very, very important that you should be aware of. The first one is intent-based networking. And again, it might be in many of you may have heard it, some of you have not. Those who have heard it and seen it extensively may feel it's more hype. Well, it's a little bit of everything. There is some marketing in there, but I think from an architecture standpoint, intent-based networking really intends to deliver the automation, the visibility, and analytics that industry experts feel is going to be very, very important for the next generation of cloud and edge transformation. So from that perspective, while it is nascent technology, we do feel that the visibility attributes, the analytics attributes are going to be very, very important. Even more so when we start thinking about the benefits in the next few years that we in the industry will start to get from machine learning and from artificial intelligence. Because then you can start to leverage some of that learnings, all of that training that goes there, right? And be able to build closed loop automation tools to deliver on the promise of automation. And I'll keep it very quick. The next one is around cloud-managed networking. We've all been used to on-prem deployment of IT and network architectures. With cloud-managed networking, you may have a combination of on-prem and off-prem technologies, but the most important aspect is to be able to go to a central portal that resides somewhere in the cloud and is at the hands of IT practitioners or even at senior executives who can actually look at the power of the entire infrastructure and have it at their vision command. So the capabilities that come from a multi-cloud standpoint, while you are in any location at any place in the cloud, the benefits start to be pretty significant. So that's the second area that I thought I should talk about vis-a-vis network transformation. And even these areas, visibility is going to be a key attribute, and I thought I'll talk about this here as part of our session today. So with that, I'm going to move over and go a little bit deeper into why network visibility, why analytics are essential as we move from cloud to edge. So from my perspective, they are essential, and the key is, unless you can actually see what's happening on your network, how can you take corrective action? That visibility is absolutely important. I've talked to a number of practitioners who say, okay, I have good visibility within my network, but as the cloud traffic leaves my network, I have no idea where my application is going and what's happening there, right? So our surveys have told us, and this is a survey we did at the very end of 17, so fairly current data, over 70% of enterprises will spend an average of $375K on network monitoring and analytics to get network visibility in 2018 and 2019. So while, of course, many of you come from different sizes of organizations, your numbers will vary, no question. But the point is, if an average enterprise and even a mid-sized enterprise is thinking around nearly $400K of investment, this tells you this is important for enterprise IT practitioners. When it comes to network abstraction, when it comes to DevOps, and also in parallel managing their legacy platforms, I think all of these combined are a pretty significant investment that we see practitioners making in this domain. So I'll move on to the next one, really. And now that I've set the stage, I want to give you a little bit of a preview of what the future beholds when it comes to SD-WAN. So from our perspective as industry watchers, I would say, the key is really, I talked about intent-based networking, if you remember. Add intelligent automation to it, and that combined platform, if you will become almost table stakes for SD-WAN deployments in the next phase of this deployment. Machine learning and AI, it'll be a key building block of all network transformation that is to come, which will include visibility and analytics. And the next part of SD-WAN is going to take us to pervasive security. With all the virtualization we are seeing, where hardware appliances get abstracted into virtual network and security functions, you will see architectures that are a lot more dynamic and flexible, and will be able to allow these enterprise IT architectures to give you the pervasive security that we all have been trying to get to for years and years. And SD-WAN coupled with visibility helps you get there. And that exactly is my last point here. Visibility is going to be a key attribute of SD-WAN, and I think the focus on this doesn't go away. We've made great strides in the industry, and Steve is eager to get going and share his experiences with you, but I don't think we are quite there yet. I think we still have ways to go in terms of the industry. So look to various vendors like CA to continue to innovate in this area and help practitioners such as yourself. So on that note, I'm going to leave you with my essential guidance, as I mentioned earlier in my agenda. The network and WAN transformation is absolutely upon us and is a key requirement, I would say, in this evolution towards DX and cloud architectures. Specific to SD-WAN, the growth that we are seeing on SD-WAN is really aligned with cloud application consumption in the enterprise. So think of these in going parallel, and the rapid growth, therefore, is going to be there. And the last but not the least is around network visibility, which we think is an adjunct tool that goes with SD-WAN. But when you combine it with AI and ML, the benefits and the architectural implementations of these have a lot of interest from folks such as myself, but I would say most industry pundits and even CIOs would agree that the power of AI and ML is something that they are trying to get to, and coupled with network visibility, they finally will see the tools that can lead them to complete and fairly comprehensive network automation. So on that note, I'm going to hand it off to my friend Steve Guthrie to share his experiences with you.
Thanks, Rohit. That was great. And you made a couple comments that I'll probably refer back to because there were really some trends that we're seeing and experiencing in our marketplace. What I'd like to do today is just talk about, first off, slow is the new down. Some of you have heard of that. I'll show you some statistics behind that. I want to talk about why network visibility, which Rohit you just talked about, is so critical for this movement toward the edge and software-defined WAN. I spoke earlier about my experience, and I just looked over about a dozen RFPs, and I saw 5 really common requirements that customers were having as they looked at how to monitor their SD-WAN. And then I want to just talk a little bit about that intelligent infrastructure needing AI and machine learning that you talked about. And last, I want to close out with an offer of an ebook that is available to our viewers today. So if I think about slow is the new down, the numbers here are staggering. The amount of money that's lost on an annual basis due to downtime or on an hourly basis. Just as a case in point, we started doing work with an organization that after 2 days of their website being down, very critical e-commerce organization, they computed that their loss was $50,000 a minute. So imagine the cost there. So these are real numbers, and I've cited the sources for the data here. And then from a mobile experience, what we found and what's documented in the third footnote is that if a mobile user is trying to access an application and there's a delay loading a page of more than 3 minutes, the likelihood that they're going to abandon that effort and possibly go to the next provider or the third provider in that same market, think hotel, think car, think restaurant reservation, abandonment is pretty common. And if you think about slow, and you referenced Office 365, I happen to be an Office 365 user. I also use Salesforce. I use SuccessFactors. I use Concur. I use ADP. A lot of my applications are residing in the cloud today, and I'm all over the place. I'm in my office where it's wireless. I'm in airports. I'm in hotels. I'm in office lobbies. Today I'm in a studio on a guest network. And if the performance of that network is slow, maybe there isn't a cost associated with that, but there's a lot of frustration. So if we go to, why the need, we've spoken both now about the movement toward cloud and the applications and the infrastructure that's in the cloud. Hosting applications on AWS or Azure or Google or some of our private cloud providers is very common, and so we need to guarantee the connectivity of those connections. Now that we have separated the control plane from the data plane, the complexity of managing that hardware, the complexity of monitoring that hardware has increased substantially. And as we start to build in intelligence SD-WAN and start to think about how we use least cost routing, as you mentioned, MPLS is a great connectivity. Most, if not all, of our customers have at least, multiple MPLS connectivities. They're also looking, how do I use the internet or use the broadband to lower the cost of those very costly circuits? And depending on where you are in the world, those circuits can be extremely expensive, and they can take a long time to provision. So, calling up and saying, hey, I need additional capacity isn't something that's going to happen overnight. It's going to be 3, 4, 5 months later, potentially, before you get that capacity. And then lastly, rolling out SD-WAN requires some thinking, some process. What are my applications? What are the classes that I want to apply to those applications? What are the routes that I'm going to have? What classes do I want on routes? What are my preferred routes? So there's a lot of planning that needs to go on. And then from a capacity perspective, again, I need to know, do I need more capacity and when? And using artificial intelligence and machine learning, can I start to predict into the future so that I'm not waiting to the day where, say, my latency hits 2% because I'm starting to saturate that connectivity, but can I know that a month ahead of time so I have some window of planning? So I mentioned 5 use cases, and I just want to add here, when I started putting this deck together and I reviewed those RFPs, I started with 12. And because those 12 were consistent across, and if folks are familiar with RFPs, I know our end users are very familiar with RFPs, they put them together, I have to complete them. There's oftentimes hundreds of requirements, right? And so, but oftentimes you can boil those down to a certain number of use cases. So the first one I started with was inventory. I need to know my inventory. I need to know what's out there. I need to know what to monitor. I need to know within my monitoring policy what's important to me, what are the important KPIs. And so I also want it easy to configure. If it can be done automatically based on some policy, some set of rules that I put in place, then I'm not sitting at a command line or maybe a GUI and having to look at all my applications and spending lots of time keeping that system up. Back in the old days, it was set and forget. Now, due to the dynamic natures of our applications and our circuits and our tunnels, set and forget is really difficult, but I want to make it easy. And then lastly, I want to think about my 3-zone defense, if you will. I want to think about my sites and what's in my sites, what's in my branches, and what's in my data center. So we think of this as a 3-zone defense, and those are the real critical areas that I want to look at. And then within sites, I want to understand my classes, my interfaces, the trends, as well as other components to what's important to me from a metrics perspective. My second use case is the fact that while I'm introducing this new technology, this new software-defined technology, the new software-defined WAN technology, I'm not giving up on my old technology. What we know from a monitoring business is people keep adding, but they oftentimes don't take away. And for those of us who've been around, we went from ATM or frame, and all of a sudden we went to MPLS. And it was a long time before those ATM circuits or those frame relay circuits went away. Yes, we added MPLS, but we kept on the old. And the same is true today. We're not going to move all of our traffic to broadband. We're going to keep those MPLS infrastructures there and those tunnels and those circuits there. So I need to understand both the virtual and the physical. And from a monitoring perspective, we've always prided ourselves in doing both the physical and the virtual, as well as multi-vendor. It's common today to say I'm a XYZ shop, and you know the hardware vendors that I can be thinking about. But more often than not, they have other vendors in those environments. Maybe their primary vendor is XYZ, but they've got some ABC, they got some QRTS. So one of the values that we bring to the proposition is that we're multi-vendor. My third use case is visualization. I want to have, a geographic map, if you will, of what my network looks like. What we've discovered over the years is if you have a management console or a monitoring console that is very difficult to work through, very difficult to understand, the workflows are difficult to figure out, those solutions don't do well. Our users today are very visual, so in addition to all the numbers and the dials and the charts and the maps, etc., they want high visual. And they also want to know about the heat. And so this concept of heat maps has become very popular, and using the very standard, green, orange, yellow, red, using that very standard colors that we've always come to learn and appreciate. Now, how can I apply those? And in this picture here that you're looking at, in addition to those nice dials and graphs at the top, you see that map. And as we can see from this map, I've got some strong issues. I've got major alarms between my San Jose and my Dallas. Otherwise, I can see that my connections are all nice, whether it's from Chicago to Detroit or Chicago to Dallas or up into Seattle from San Jose. As we drill down into these, we want to see some of those key metrics. Latency, jitter, packet loss continue to be some really important factors when it comes to the wide area network and the edge that you referred to. And so having this visual representation, these nice workflows, these nice intuitive displays really helps improve mean time to repair, and also understanding who do I need to get involved with. As our level 1 practitioners start to determine what's wrong, who do they need to involve at a level 2 or level 3 triage perspective? My next use case is understanding tunnels across my WAN. One of the reasons that slow is the new down, or down is less important, is we've gotten really good about redundant routes. Organizations today very rarely have one door to the outside world, if you will. In fact, in some industries, it's mandated that they have multiple, and in fact, they have multiple providers of those multiple tunnels, so that in the case of the heat-seeking, cable-seeking backhoe, if the backhoe creates a new trench by the front door, the back door goes to another service provider so that they have connectivity. But I also have to, understand from those tunnels, where is the problem? And if I look at that graph to the right in the long graph, right, I can see that I've got some issues with one of my tunnels from Dallas. And it's clearly obvious to me. It's red, it's orange, it's yellow. So I can start to see what aspect of traffic on that particular tunnel is creating that major alarm, and I can start to focus on it. And again, going back to that 3-zone defense, I can understand, hey, is it the site? Is it the WAN? Is it the data center? Is it the branch, etc.? My last use case, coming back to tunnels again, and we referred to this earlier on, is this concept of app class. From a diff-serve perspective, we've always thought about expedited forwarding and assured forwarding and best effort. And we've always had those distinctions. But now as we start to think about, well, my best effort probably should only go over the broadband network, right? Why spend a lot of money on an MPLS circuit to send email or maybe even web browsing? But within web browsing, there may be some certain applications where best effort isn't good enough. So you want to put those on a preferred path that is an MPLS circuit. So understanding the concept of app classes and then applying rules to say my preferred path for email is the broadband, my preferred path for voice is always expedited forwarding, or the gold class based on how your service provider defines those classes for you. And in a few minutes, we'll talk about how using automation as one of those classes or circuits or tunnels gets saturated, how could I automate that? And using artificial intelligence to say, hey, in X days, you're going to have a problem. Let's take a look at those classes and maybe using automation, just say, go set up a new application class or go create a new tunnel or do something that automation can do because it's repeatable and you don't need manual intervention. So now let's talk about intelligent infrastructure. I mentioned earlier on that I work in a group that we call AIOps, or Artificial Intelligent Operations. This is a movement in our business that has taken on a very substantial life, and it's really important as we think about what's happening in IT today. The day of people sitting around and having lots of time to do manual efforts, to monitor screens, to be sitting in front of screens and waiting for things to happen, and then, hair on fire and get everybody involved. There's a favorite picture of mine where in a real picture in an office place, 13 people huddled around a series of cubes, everybody looking at a screen trying to figure out what the problem is. There's probably a conference phone that's active. There are probably people in conference rooms in other locations that are involved in this same suit. So how can we start to use intelligent infrastructure operations to help? From a CA perspective, our experience in this business going back a couple of decades, we now have a portfolio that we call NetOps that gives us a good broad perspective of various ways to look at your monitoring and think about how to create a more holistic view of the network and the operations behind that network. So, for example, on the left there, the ability to create a topology, that very intuitive topology. I showed you a couple screenshots back a while ago, understanding the inventory and the fault that's created by those inventories. And we think of this as our network health and availability solution area. From a performance perspective, SNMP has been the most common protocol for monitoring equipment, but it's not the only way that you want to think about performance. So looking at flow, net flow, or network flow, thinking about protocols and packets and application response, using an API, a RESTful API to bring in data that may be your own data or third-party data, adding to this network operations and analytics portal there in that middle row. Increasingly, telemetry is going to be an important aspect as our network vendors start to subtly move away from SNMP and think about how telemetry and how we can use that data. Logs as another form of data that we want to be able to apply to our monitoring solution. Syslogs, just as an example, whether it's syslogs from a network perspective or from a security perspective, how can I take that data and feed it into my portal and use that as a way to triage problems? Moving to the right, network automation. There have been various forms of network automation over the years, but with the new software-defined environments and from a service activation and provisioning perspective, there's a new paradigm coming, and the thought of how we look at that from an inventory, topology, and SLA perspective. And then from service remediation, I spoke about automation a little while ago and how maybe we have to move some traffic, or we have to create some new app classes, or we have to move a particular business service from one app class to another. But also think about just all the other things that can be involved, from a provisioning of new data collection devices, provisioning of new servers, provisioning of various aspects that, again, today often done manually. But oftentimes when it's manually oriented, it's we'll get to that next week, or put in a change request and it moves through a slow process. IT can no longer be the bottleneck to business success. And we see organizations today embracing automation much more than they would have, say, 10 years ago. So I mentioned some of the analytics that we're providing today. Here's an example of a broadband connection between Phoenix and New York. The purple represents the metric values that are going up and down, and then the green line shows the trend. And what this is telling us is that within 5 days, we're going to hit that 2% threshold that we've created. So within 5 days, I'm going to start experiencing poor performance on this particular connection. And then within a week, within 7 days, I'm actually going to exceed that 2%. Now, typically what happens is we don't take care of it, or we don't have resources to take care of it. It hits that 5 days, it hits that threshold, and then it's hair on fire. And then 2 days later, because we're still working through, maybe we're having to rearrange app classes. 2 days later, we're now exceeding that threshold, and users are starting to complain. We've discovered this. Tickets have been opened up. Level 1's got involved. Level 2's got involved. The network architects got involved. And we're going to resolve the problem, for sure. But now think about this. A month ago, maybe even 2 weeks ago, we see this trend. We have this projection. We have this prediction. Now we can start to say, wait a minute, why don't we invoke that automation rule that fixes this problem without all that manual intervention? Another aspect where we can use predictions and artificial intelligence is looking at path utilization. And I know this is a busy screenshot, but what's obvious, intuitive, but highly visual is I've got a real problem with Office 365. As you can see here, today the performance is at 90% of the SLA, and it's going down. So Office 365 is going down, my voice is going down, my video is looking good. But as I look down and further, I can see some other information about my application costs, for example. I can see about my reroutes. I can see my health analysis. What's really interesting here is from a cost perspective, and I know this is really difficult to see, but in the lower left, you can see that on average, I'm paying about a quarter on my internet circuit, and I'm paying $1 on my MPLS circuit. But overall, the cost has leveled off. So I can see that I'm being very effective in how I use my path utilization and the use of my preferreds. The other thing that's interesting here is you can see, hopefully, that there's a number 36 of reroutes. And one of the things that we're going to learn as we deploy SD-WANs more and more is reroutes are going to be very common. And so there's going to be flapping. And one of the issues with flapping is I'm probably going to get an alarm or an event that circuit just flapped. I may get 36 of those, one right after another. And am I supposed to be paying attention to those? And so building some intelligence into our solution that says, you know what, those reroutes are okay. It's good. It's good information to have, but I don't have to pay anything attention. So highly visual information with lots of data behind them make it really easy to triage problems and improve mean time to repair. My next to last slide is a picture that we are showing and using with our prospects and customers today. And let me describe it, and I'm going to start at the lower left. So today we have lots of monitoring tools, in whether it's for our applications, our infrastructure, our network, or NetOps. So we're very good at collecting data, and today that data is exploding. The volume of data today that we can provide off our collection tools and methods is very substantial. And there's also third party. I represent a company called CA, but there are no CA shops in the world. There's always third-party tools, and our customers don't want to abandon those third-party tools. For one reason, they like them. Another reason is maybe we don't have an alternative. So there's always going to be a world. And so that lower layer talks about the various data sources. What we're building today, what we call our Digital Experience Insight Platform, is predicated on a data lake, a unified data lake that takes in all that data, again, whether it's CA data or third-party data. We use open APIs to make it really easy to get third-party data in. So we create this data lake using open source technologies. Many of you are familiar with the Elastic Stack. We use that open source technology to create that data lake, and then we overlay some analytics. We have some technology that internally we call CA Jarvis, but it gives us that artificial intelligence and machine learning layer. And some of the most common use cases for analytics today are service analytics. I want to think about my business services. My favorite business service is payroll. It's my wife's favorite business service as well. So thinking about the business services and how we analyze those. Performance and alarm. I mentioned the number of alarms. We've had alarm suppression technology in our business, particularly in our NetOps portfolio, for many years. But as we start to think about combining app infrastructure and NetOps and all the alarms that come in, how do we determine that those 500 alarms are all associated with one incident, one interface that's out, and all the downstream events that apply? So how do we analyze performance and alarms? Thinking about log analytics, I mentioned syslog earlier. There's a lot of information that can be gleaned out of logs. Capacity, I mentioned capacity. It's a real substantial problem, not just from an edge perspective, but internally or with your cloud providers. Do I have enough memory CPU? Do I have enough bandwidth on my edge circuits? And then that contextual automation. When something happens, can I automate a repeatable triage problem? And then across the top, I've highlighted the network engineer because we're talking about SD-WAN today, and it's a very network-oriented topic, but also other personas that are interested in looking at the results that come from this analytics, be it the app owner, the server admin, or the NOC operator. And with that, I just want to close out with a URL for an ebook. It's a great read. It's not a very substantial ebook. It can be consumed in one setting. If you just take a moment to write down that URL, you can easily download it. I want to close by saying that, going back to one of your first comments, Rohit, about the popularity of SD-WAN, and you mentioned that today 14%, or I think exactly 14.4%, are looking at cloud-optimized enterprises. We definitely see that number growing, and I agree with you. I wouldn't be surprised if it's 42% in 24 months. We see it in healthcare. We see it in retail, airlines, government agencies, manufacturing. I use those 5 industry segments because those are 5 opportunities that I'm personally involved with right now. And so I'm pretty confident that we'll hit 42. And with that, I'd like to thank you, Rohit, for sharing your sage counsel as always, and thank you to the audience.
With that, we're at the end of our time for this session. I want to give a big thanks to Rohit Mehra with IDC and Steve Guthrie with CA. Thanks to both of you for your insights and expertise today. And of course, a big thanks to everyone who tuned in for this informative session. A quick reminder, you can find additional information on this topic right here on your player in the Resources section. Also, that will include a link to today's presentation and to the ebook that Steve mentioned. Once again, thanks everyone for joining us, and for CA and IDG, this is Jim Malone saying thanks for tuning in.